You like black? I like black. Black's my favorite color. Hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I'm continuing my masculine feminine energies film breakdown series with Rocky and Rocky 2. If you're not familiar with what I mean by masculine and feminine energies, I have tons of videos on this content, but a brief summary. Masculine and feminine energies are energies live within all of us. We all contain both energies. We all have a core energy. This is when we're most ourselves in. That energy may link up with our gender. It doesn't have to, but it very often does. We can be in wounded or healed versions of either of these energies. And these energies all contain archetypes. We all contain all of the archetypes within us that we can tap into whenever we need to. And I have videos about the masculine and the feminine archetypes if you want to learn more. And in order to have sexual polarity in a relationship, you need one partner to be in the masculine and one partner to be in the feminine. Because opposite energies attract sexually and same energies repel sexually. So let's get into Rocky and Rocky 2. Now, I actually had a lot of requests for various Rocky movies and also the modern day like Creed movie. And I had not seen any of these movies at all. Like, I kind of knew some of the pop culture references to the original Rocky movies, but I had not seen any of them. And I decided to just watch 1 and 2 because that's really all I had time for to do this breakdown. If you guys want more of this movie series, let me know. But I'm just gonna focus in this breakdown on Rockies 1 and 2. So if there's anything in the future movies that contradict something I say in this breakdown, I haven't seen it yet, I don't know. So I'm just basing this breakdown on the first 2 Rocky movies. Primarily on the original one. In reality, especially movies from that time period, the original one is usually the strongest because it's sort of like that original piece of art, and then the follow-up ones tend to be a little bit more afterthoughts. That's not to say that Rocky 2 is a bad movie. I do think that there's more relationship dynamics in the original one, so I'm going to focus on that one a little bit more. I want to focus primarily on the relationship between Rocky and Adrian. It's really interesting because, I mean, I knew like the iconic moment where he's like screaming for Adrian and she's like, Rocky, he's like, Adrian, she's like, Rocky, you know, that whole kind of thing. But I didn't really know the context of how that happened, and I really didn't know anything about their relationship. I kind of had a concept for like Rocky Balboa and him being a boxer and stuff, but I didn't really know too much about his character, and I knew nothing about the Adrian character, and I was really pleasantly surprised when I actually saw their dynamic together. Rocky Balboa is such a fascinating character because he's such a good person. He's horribly flawed, but a good person. And I think that it's such an endearing quality in a person, right? Like, he's not perfect, he's got a lot of flaws, he's got a lot of wounding, he's not too bright, he's not very focused, like he has a lot of flaws, but he's got such a good heart. He always means well. Like, he genuinely cares about people, he has love and compassion, and in reality, even with all of his flaws, and he's not perfect by any means, which makes him a more interesting person or character, obviously, that combination of a masculine man, which he is obviously very masculine at his core, a masculine man who has a lot of strength, a lot of power, he's a natural protector, you know, can fight when he needs to. Like, that level of like masculine strength combined with he has a really strong connection to his feminine energy. He has so much heart and love and compassion and caring, and he's empathetic. That combination in reality is what women want. Now, I'm not saying that Rocky is specifically what all women want, because in reality he has some flaws that like some women might be able to overlook and some women wouldn't be able to. And I actually have another video where I dive into this deeper, where there are many women who believe that they need to have a macho asshole because he's the only one that's going to be actually like strong enough to be a protector, or they have to have a passive sort of nice guy, wimpy guy, because like he's the one who's going to be like sensitive to her and actually like care about her well-being. And most women, they kind of settle for either extreme, but in reality most women want both. Like, you want a man who can be a strong protector and provider, and someone who's actually going to love you and have compassion and empathy for you and actually care about you. Like, as women, we want both. And, you know, while Rocky is a very flawed character, he is the embodiment of both. He's a very strong, powerful man. It's a drive to protect. He has a big giving energy too, which I'm going to dive into. He is very masculine at his core, but he's also very loving and compassionate. That really at the core is what women want. Now, he has a lot of other flaws. He's not very bright. He does lose focus a lot, into some wounding here and there that, you know, make him not really the ideal partner in every sense. But in reality, like, at his core, that man who is strong and powerful and who has love and compassion, that's really what women are looking for. You know, we don't want to have to choose between a guy who is, you know, a strong and protector but treats us like crap, or a man who maybe treats us nicely but can't actually protect and provide for us. We want a man who's able to do both. And Rocky is such an amazing example of that. You see it right away. So Rocky is kind of like a fighter who's never really made it. You know, he's like good but never really been like great at what he's doing. He kind of ends up as this sort of hired muscle for this guy, where he's basically going off and trying to collect money from people, and you know, he gets like orders to, you know, break people's, I think it's break a finger at one point, or basically he gets orders to like hurt people if they don't pay up. And he'll say something about how like he's not emotionally involved in the situation, but in reality, a truly masculine man is not going to be able to hurt someone unless he feels like it's absolutely in the highest good of all people. It's like a truly masculine man is not going to resort to violence if it's not necessary. And I know that sounds ironic because this is a movie about a boxer who does fight professionally, but that's kind of a separate thing. When I'm talking about everyday interactions with people, a truly masculine man is not just going to go hurt someone just for the sake of hurting someone. It's interesting, Rocky kind of pretends like he doesn't care about people. Like he pretends that he doesn't care if somebody gets hurt, but he actually does have a big heart and cares. Somebody actually referred to, and I think I mentioned this in my Star Wars breakdown, about like Han Solo, and the appeal of Han Solo is a man who thinks he's just operating from his ego or like disconnected from his feelings, but actually does have a lot of heart and compassion, is an incredibly appealing character, right? The reverse is not true. Like if somebody thinks they have a lot of heart and compassion but is actually a heartless person, that's someone you want to steer clear of, because that's kind of when you start to get into like sociopaths and things like that. Somebody who actually like doesn't really even understand that they have so much love and compassion, but they actually have that love and compassion, it's a very endearing character in a person or a character or anything like that. There's also another important scene that I think really signifies Rocky and his like drive to protect. It could be interpreted in several different ways. Like there's a young girl in the neighborhood, Marie, you kind of get the impression that she's like the younger sister of someone who Rocky knows, and he sees her like on the streets like hanging out with a bunch of boys that he knows are, as he puts it, they're coconuts. You don't want to hang out with a bunch of coconuts, right? So Rocky basically walks her home and he's basically giving her this speech, and I know there's a lot of women who could very well interpret this as him trying to control her, or you know, him trying to tell her what to do. In reality, he's just trying to give her advice. Now, is it the most eloquent advice? No, Rocky's not an eloquent guy. That's just not how his mind works. He's basically trying to tell her that like if you just keep hanging out with these losers, you hang out with these bad men, you're running off your mouth, you got a foul mouth. If you don't, like essentially he's trying to tell her like if you don't have self-respect, then nobody else is gonna respect you. Like if you don't actually like own your own worth, other people aren't gonna own your worth. And you know, he's telling her stories about like a girl in his old neighborhood that, you know, the men basically just used and everything. And I know there's probably a lot of like more like modern day feminists who are going to argue that he has no business telling her these things, but in reality, the fact that he has this drive to step in as a father figure. Now she calls him a creep, but he's not being creepy at all. I mean, I have to give him that. Like there's this young girl and he really just like wants her to be safe. He wants her to protect herself. And he didn't have to go out of his way to do that. He didn't have to go out of his way to care about her and to try to impart this wisdom on her. And she kind of seemed like she didn't want to accept the advice, and she was basically like told him off at the end. Hopefully, I mean obviously this is a fictional character, but hopefully if this was real life, that maybe that would sink in and she would start to question her choices. You don't know, but I see it so much nowadays, especially online, is the number of like older men who see young girls and their first instinct is to prey on them and to like control them and mold them, and seeing this representation of a man who, you know, he's not perfect, he's not the brightest guy in the world, but he actually cares enough about this young girl to want to advise her about how she can own her worth and how she can actually keep herself safe in a world that isn't really that safe for women. I just thought that was a really nice scene to see, you know what I mean? It had a very like fatherly element, it had a very protector energy, and that's something, and this is getting off track from this movie, but it's something that I see come up a lot, where I see a lot of men online that get upset that people are concerned about really young, and in many cases barely legal or not legal girls who are basically being preyed upon by these much older men. When women, like say women my age, get upset about that, they're like, you're just jealous. And it's like, well no, there's a sense there of you know, as older women, we want to protect these young girls, and you would hope that there are more men in the world, and I'm hoping that there are, and that the social media realm of kind of weirdos is actually the minority. There are enough grown adult men who feel an urge to protect women in general, but especially like young girls, and actually want to keep them safe and not want to prey on them. I don't know. I mean, I'm diving into that scene like way deeper than it probably needs to be. It was really beautiful to see that. I know there's a lot of people who are going to argue that he shouldn't have been telling her what to do or giving her unsolicited advice, or, you know, he was kind of putting that good girl image on her, but to a certain extent, the way I interpreted it is he was trying to help this young girl to know that if she doesn't see her worth, other people aren't going to see her worth. She has to own her worth and carry herself in a way that owns her worth in order to get people in her life who are going to own her worth as well. And that's just, that scene really kind of like blew me away when I saw it, so I wanted to highlight that. Rocky and Adrian are just, Rocky refers to it one time when Adrian's brother kind of is like, you know, why are you interested in my sister or something, and he says something about like we fill each other in or something like that. Like they really do. I mean, they're two very flawed individuals that seem to come together and meet. That can easily translate into codependency. So I think we need to be a little careful of that in general in real life. That said, let's face it, in reality, we're all human. We're all humans. We all have flaws. Reality is not to find a person who doesn't have a flaw, because good luck doing that. The goal is to find someone whose flaws can fit with your flaws, and the two of you, I mean, you can be better people together, absolutely. And you love this person in their good parts and in their flaws. Like, can you love them through that? Like, can you love them not even in spite of that, but can you love them for that? And I think that that's really important, and that goes both ways, right? Because we're all human at the end of the day. We all have ways that we're flawed. We all have traumas. We all have, you know, all kinds of stuff that we have to deal with. And you know, there are some, you know, spiritual spaces that believe that a person's flaws or their traumas or their triggers or everything are like all their own. And, you know, when you get into a partnership, none of that stuff is your partner's responsibility. And there is some truth to that. There is. However, when you get into a partnership with somebody and you're actually in like a committed relationship, each of you really have to love and accept each other for everything that you are. So it's not necessarily that you two, you know, have to be responsible for each other's flaws, but there needs to be some level of care and compassion for each other's flaws and a willingness to actually, you know, work together to, you know, work through things, or to, you know, figure out each other's different sort of, you know, shades and colors of their different personality traits, of their different traumas and triggers, and see how you can work together. It's like an emotional dance that two people do. So Rocky is very masculine in the sense that he likes Adrian, he's drawn to Adrian, and he is very focused in his attention. He doesn't really pay too much attention to like any other women, even when women are kind of throwing themselves at him, when he gets a little bit of success, or, I mean, he's a good looking guy, like he could get attention from women, but he's so focused on Adrian. And part of that too is because a truly masculine man is not going to be attracted to the woman who is throwing herself at him. He's going to be attracted to a woman who's a bit of a challenge, because masculine men love a challenge. Now, Adrian isn't intentionally being a challenge. It's genuine with Adrian because she's so socially awkward, and oh man, I identify with Adrian. I know I do a lot of stuff talking on camera, and I do a lot of, you know, I used to be on stage and whatever, so like I can be personable, but I'm incredibly socially awkward in person. So I feel Adrian. I've been her, like that person who's just like so awkward when somebody's talking to them, or like doesn't know what to say. Especially when I was younger, I was like pathologically shy. So I identify with Adrian so much. It's interesting, Adrian's responsiveness to Rocky is very subtle. Most men don't pick up on subtleties. That's just the way men are wired. Most men are not going to pick up on subtleties. So for most men, Adrian's behavior is going to be way too subtle for most men. But this is a movie. This is an extreme example. Rocky, because he's so interested in her, and like he's trying to impress her with his jokes and things like that, and she'll like subtly left. She never looks at him. She's very closed off. She's very insecure. But Rocky keeps pursuing her because he sees her as a challenge. And yes, Rocky is pursuing her. He's very focused on her, but he's kind of erratic and all over the place, which is one of his biggest flaws. He's focused on her, but he kind of gets distracted. It's like, oh, there's the dog over here, and oh, there's this, and oh, there's that, and he keeps talking, and he's talking all the time. And Adrian is just so quiet, and she's so still in a lot of cases. Like, she'll be doing something, and she keeps doing it while Rocky's talking. In those moments, Rocky's in his feminine, and Adrian's in her masculine. Usually, and I know there's been some debate about this when I've mentioned this in other videos, but usually the person who is moving the most tends to be the person in the feminine, and the person who has the most stillness or like intentional movements is usually in the masculine. There's probably exceptions to this rule for sure. I've seen this happen in like workshops and stuff where the more that a man moves, like the more he kind of gets into his kind of like erraticness, the more stillness a woman will get into. Because she literally like shuts down, because men who are like sort of moving too much, talking too much, that kind of erratic energy tends to feel unsafe for women. So that's one of the things that I think is blocking Rocky and Adrian from getting together, especially in the beginning. Like, Rocky is showing interest in her. Adrian really does like him, but because he's got that really like talk, and he's moving all the time and he's erratic, she's not relaxed in her safety, right? Like, she's nervous, she's closed off, and now of course she doesn't really have a lot of experience with men. She has a really bad home life, which I'm going to get into a little bit later. Very unsure of herself. One of the reasons why the two of them are having a hard time coming together, like Rocky is interested in pursuing her, she's more closed off to him because that erraticness isn't going to feel safe for her. Like, if a man finds himself kind of all over the place, it's going to shut down a woman. Whereas if a man can get very grounded, that's going to allow a woman to open and soften more, because she's going to feel that safety. And that actually happens too a little bit later, but they end up going on a first date. And she fights it. She doesn't want to go, but she agrees to go. She's so shut down the whole date. Like, she's so closed off. They end up going ice skating, or Adrian's ice skating, and Rocky is not on skates, but he's kind of just going alongside her. He's protecting her. He's keeping her safe. I mean, he is very loving, and he's also very protective of her and wants her to have a good time. He's kind of talking to hear himself talk, which is probably nervous because he's self-conscious about not being so smart. There's a really interesting moment when they're at the skating rink, and I think this is so symbolic. There's a line where Rocky says that his dad told him that he didn't have much of a brain, he was going to have to learn to use his body. And Adrian said that her mom said pretty much the exact opposite to her, that she didn't have much of a body, she was going to have to use her brain. The masculine is the mind and the feminine is the body. That exists in individuals, right? So like, if you as an individual person are using your mind, like you're thinking, planning, like you're in your head, you're typically in your masculine. If you're in your body, you're in your feeling, your emotion, your intuition, you're in your feminine. And that can happen in an individual. However, when you get two people together in a relationship and you have one person in the masculine, one person in the feminine, and you have a masculine partner who can use his mind and his direction and his thinking, and you have a feminine who can use her body and her intuition and her feeling, they come together because that's their natural core energy, so that's when they're at their best. The masculine is at his best using his mind, but he's not as comfortable in his body. Whereas the feminine can use her mind, but she's more comfortable in her body. So you get a masculine partner who gets to use his strength, and you get the feminine partner that gets to use her strength. They come together, and it's just like, that's a power couple as far as I'm concerned. The thing that I find really interesting about this scene is that you have a man who's very masculine in his core. Rocky's very masculine, although he has a lot of connection to his feminine energy. He's a very masculine man. He's basically being told by his father, like, hey, you don't really have a mind, you don't have masculine direction, you better learn to use your body. Which is one of the reasons why he probably didn't cultivate an intelligence, why he's kind of barely literate, really. And he didn't cultivate that mind because he was told he didn't have one. If he had been told that he had a mind, or if he hadn't been discouraged that way, he might have kept up his education more, he might have learned to use his mind more. Who knows? We don't really know. But a lot of that stuff can be a self-fulfilling prophecy. So he kind of, in a way, was kind of told he didn't really have masculine direction. He was going to have to use his body, which kind of rejected his masculine and kind of pushed him into his feminine. On the flip side, you have Adrian. Now, the feminine is the body. She's told she doesn't have a body, and I mean, that's so common today, the number of women that get shamed for their bodies at such a young age. I mean, my body image issues started at like 4. So for most women, their body image issues start so young. And for women, because women today feel so ashamed of their bodies, we always feel like our bodies just aren't right, like they're not good enough. It disconnects us from our feminine bodies so much. And we get told like, well, you better use your mind. Like, you better use your masculine mind because your body's not good enough, right? And it's literally, you have two people who are basically, were told at a young age that that their natural core energy essentially was not good enough, and they were going to have to use their opposite. So, and a lot of times in this film, and especially in Rocky 2, Adrian has to be the mind a lot of the time, and Rocky is more in the body, in the feminine, in a lot of Rocky 2, which I'll get into in a little bit. But yeah, I just thought that was so symbolic there, and it's so common nowadays. We end up going back to Rocky's apartment, and Adrian is very hesitant. She is very closed off. She's very nervous. She's, you know, and Rocky really wants her to trust him. He doesn't necessarily know how to make her trust him, but he desires that trust. The masculine will deeply, deeply desire trust in the feminine. However, when a masculine man isn't really necessarily fully connected to his masculine and doesn't really know how to tap into that properly, it can be really hard for him to cultivate that trust in the feminine. And because Rocky is still a bit erratic, and some of that's probably nervous energy for sure, kind of makes sense that in his nervous energy he talks too much. In Adrian's nervous energy she shuts down, right? That's very common. It kind of makes sense the two of them are going to kind of come together. Again, like Rocky says, they kind of fill each other in. But it's actually when Rocky gets very focused and very direct, and it's very similar to the scene in The Quiet Man with the breakdown where he literally kind of like he creates this container. He puts his arms up against the wall, and Adrian's in the corner, and he slows down. He's still, and he basically says like, I'm gonna kiss you. You don't have to kiss me back, but I really want to kiss you. And he's fully seeing her, like takes off her glasses, takes off her hat, like fully sees her beauty. And Adrian's not comfortable with her beauty, so she's still really hesitant about this. But the fact that she has this man who is fully seeing her, like fully seeing her in all of her insecurities, all the things that she questions about herself, is seeing her as beautiful, which she hadn't seen in herself. And he's now in this stillness, and he's creating this sort of safe container, which I talked about in my Titanic breakdown about masculine containment. I would never suggest a woman go back to a man's apartment, especially on a first date when you don't know him or anything like that. This is just a movie. When he does create that safe container and he does slow down and he is much more focused and he kind of steps into his masculine, that's the moment that she starts to sink into her feminine, because she starts to feel safety with him. And that erratic energy of him being all over the place wasn't creating safety. So when he does create that safety, that stillness, that's when she starts to calm down and they kind of like sink into each other. It's a really beautiful moment when they come together. Now, it's interesting when Mickey, who's Rocky's trainer, makes a comment about women weaken the legs. And he wants Rocky to kind of stay away from Adrian for a while. And, you know, Rocky's not really going to, but there is something about the idea that the distraction of the feminine can be detrimental to the masculine if he's unable to stay focused on his direction, right? Like if you're a man and you're facing a wild beast because it's like you're like hunting and it's eat or be eaten or something like that. You don't want to be thinking about your woman at home or thinking about trying to have sex or you can't have that distraction in your mind. You have to focus on what's in front of you. Having the right feminine partner in your life can absolutely make the masculine step up. He just needs to be able to focus on what is in front of him at that moment, because the masculine mind is very singularly focused. So he needs to focus on what's in front of him. Like he's boxing, he needs to focus on his opponent. He's hunting, he needs to focus on what he's hunting. Trading stocks or something. He's got to be focused on that. He has to be focused on what is in front of him. So in those moments, he can't be like distracted thinking about, you know, his wife, his family, his whatever. He needs to stay focused on the things in front of him. Having the support of a loving feminine partner by his side through that can absolutely inspire the masculine to step up to heights that he could never be doing just on his own. I mean, you see that. I mean, statistics all show that men that are married, I mean, they don't even have to be good marriages. I mean, ideally, if it's a great feminine partner, for sure, but like even in just mediocre marriages, men see vast improvements in their success and things like that, which is one of the reasons why married men tend to be the happiest group of people, because they tend to be more successful when they have a feminine partner by their side. And I cannot believe that I spent so many years hearing like the Adrian and the Rocky, like him yelling to her as like almost like a joke, like it was this cliche. And when I actually saw the moment in the movie, like I almost started crying. Like it's such a beautiful moment. Like Rocky is in this fight, he's fighting Apollo Creed, he's got this moment, like it's the ultimate underdog story. And I'm not going to dive into the whole aspects of this from like a sportsmanship perspective or anything like that, because I want to focus on the relationship dynamics and the masculine feminine energies. But the fact that Rocky, who clearly can kick into his masculine. He can focus, he can have direction, he can have a purpose. Like he just says he wants to go the distance with the champ. He doesn't even care if he wins. That's a big aspect of this too, where he lets go of his fear of not succeeding. He lets go of his ego. He lets go of his ego with Mickey too, where he kind of has to release a lot. He's a big ego death with Mickey, where he's, you know, like, I never got a chance, I never got this, and, you know, he's got to let go of a lot of that stuff. Like, a lot of this movie is like Rocky kind of letting go of a lot of his ego stuff, and he is just like, hey, I just want to go the distance, this is what I want to do. The masculine does much better with having very clear goals in his life, very clear-cut goals, and when they start to be led by just these, like, ego needs of what society wants, or, you know, what they think they should do, or things like that can get really distracting. And so he has a lot of really good, like, ego death moments in this movie. In reality, when he gets to that point where he's fighting and the match ends and there's all this chaos going on and there's all this kind of stuff, all these reporters are rushing Rocky. I mean, he's just like bloodied and just beaten and a mess, and one of the reporters says something to him like, what were you thinking, Rocky, when that bell rings? And he starts screaming Adrian. Oh my god, my heart was like, oh my god, because it reminded me so much of the scene in 300, which is like one of my favorite breakdowns that I've ever done, when like Leonidas is literally like she's like sacrificing his life, and he screams like my queen, my wife, my love. Like, to me, this Adrian scene, which I didn't realize how emotional this scene was, I always thought of it as like this pop culture cliche. The fact that in this moment, it's like, what were you thinking the moment that you succeeded? Like, what were you thinking the moment that you reached that goal? And he starts screaming for Adrian because that's what he was thinking about. Like, he could be so focused on what he was doing in the ring because that was his direction, his drive, his passion, his purpose. When he succeeded, like that moment that he succeeded, what he thought about was his feminine partner, the woman he loved. She comes running to him because he really can't go to her. She has to go to him, right? Usually I advise for women to like lean back, but in this situation when he's like brutally beaten and lying on the ground or lying in a ring, you can go to him. I'll give you permission to do that. Hopefully you won't be in that actual situation, but I did think it was really beautiful. It was a subtle moment too, where she ends up like, she's kind of like fighting through the crowd to get into the ring, and she shows up and she had this like red hat on and she lost her hat, and she gets up to Rocky and he's like, what happened to your hat? Like, the fact that he still notices her so much and pays so much attention to her, that he's like, he's just done this big accomplishment. He's done this huge feat that nobody thought he could do, and you know, this is his moment. He's having this big moment, and he looks at her and is like concerned for her, like, what happened to your hat? Like, what? Like, he noticed, first of all, he noticed that she had the hat on, and also cared about her in that moment. Like, I thought that was really, like, it was subtle, but it was really beautiful. She says, I love you. And he, you know, and he says, I love you back. And normally I would not advise a woman to say, I love you first. That said, in this particular situation, Rocky had shown her, like, he had demonstrated to her so many times, and especially in that moment where, you know, this should be for most men their big ego moment. Like, for people with their ego, you know, him achieving this should have been his big ego moment. The fact that she was who he thought of, like, she was, I mean, he was literally screaming for her because she was the only person in the world that he cared about in that moment, that he wanted to share his big moment of success with. That was essentially the equivalent of him saying, I love you. And she said, I love you to him because he had shown her so much that he loved her. And in those situations, I think, and it's very delicate, because I don't want women to start jumping the gun and being like, oh, he acts like he loves me, so I want to say I love you. And in reality, you're just saying it to him because you want confirmation from him that he loves you. I would never advise a woman to say I love you first unless a man has very, very clearly demonstrated that he loves you, so that you know as a woman that he has actually said I love you, but not necessarily in words. He said it in actions. Be very delicate with that. Be very delicate with that, because as women, sometimes we can be like, oh, he did something nice for me, so he must love me or something. As a woman, never say I love you to a man unless you're doing it because you truly need to express that to him, not because you feel a need for him to express that to you. Like, it's not a confirmation that you're looking for something from him. That's a delicate situation. That's why I normally don't advise women to say I love you first. But in this particular situation, it worked because he truly had expressed that I love you, just not in those specific words. He'd expressed it with his actions, so she felt comfortable saying I love you to him. In real life, proceed with caution. All I'm gonna say. Now, to wrap up the first Rocky movie, I want to make a note about Paulie. Paulie is Adrian's brother. And oof, I don't want to dive into that too much. The scenes specifically with Paulie and Adrian, for me, really hard to watch. Like really, really hard to watch. Paulie is awful to Adrian. He treats her terribly. And I'm not going to dive into this too much because this is probably going to be a really long breakdown because I'm talking about 2 movies here. But Paulie shows so many signs of both wounded masculine, of being physically abusive, and wounded feminine, which is basically playing the victim himself. In reality, in a lot of people, we can have a certain level of wounded masculine, a certain level of wounded feminine. Sometimes we lean more towards the other. You know, we may have a little bit of combination of both here and there. In subtle forms, it just means we're human. It's just something we need to work on. However, Paulie has such an extreme level of both wounded masculine and wounded feminine energy within him. Those are people you need to be careful of. And if you think about it, in reality, like they always talk about Adrian sort of being like painfully shy, or she's like afflicted with shyness or something. I don't really know the situation with like Adrian and Paulie's parents necessarily. Paulie kind of refers to like that he raised Adrian, so I don't really know exactly what that dynamic is, but he's awful to her. He's absolutely horrible to her. And to me, it's like no wonder that Adrian is so self-conscious and so awkward and shy, because her brother is verbally abusive. He's physically abusive. I mean, he's just an abusive person overall. He even kind of has this thing where he's kind of like playing the victim, like, I didn't get married because of you. I've had to take care of you. Like, you owe me because I've done everything for you. And this whole like, oof, whoa, okay. Steer clear of men like that. People like that in general, but like in this particular situation, it's a man, so I'm gonna focus on that. For women, men like that, get as far away from as possible. That, wow, like, he's so quick to play the victim, but he's also so quick to be abusive, and like that dynamic there is just, that's dangerous. And if you have grown up with somebody in your family like that, which obviously like Adrian has, I'm sure that you probably have healing work that you need to do. I'm sure that you do. Please know that, you know, you are worthy of doing the healing work if nobody's told you that your whole life, because you've been around, you know, people like that, particularly men like that. Please know that you're worthy of doing the healing work. And if you are in a dynamic like that, you are in a relationship with somebody like that, even if it's a family situation or a romantic relationship with a man like that, I understand that it's not always the safest option to just get up and leave. I know a lot of people would just say, just get up and leave him. I understand that sometimes that's not the safest situation to be in, but I want to tell you that there are resources out there for you to get help and for you to try to do it safely. Please, please know that you're worthy of reaching out to somebody for help. My heart goes out. So I found those scenes really, really difficult to watch with Paulie, and sometimes just the way he talked about his sister when she wasn't there, but like especially when he was talking to his sister, really painful. I just, oof. That was rough. I have to admit, I do know there was a part of me that kind of wished that Rocky stood up for Adrian more. With the brother. He does to some extent, but not. I feel like at certain points he doesn't feel like it's his place, and he kind of feels like he needs to be a little bit like Paulie's his friend and lets him get away with too much. Like that part makes me a little uncomfortable. It is a movie, and when you're talking about like family dynamics and brother-sister kind of things, I can kind of understand why Rocky might not want to overstep his boundaries. Like Paulie basically kicks Adrian out, and Adrian looks at Rocky and is like, do you want a roommate? And he's like, absolutely. Absolutely. Rocky is willing to be a safe space for Adrian. I will give him that. I do wish to some extent that Rocky was a little bit quicker to protect Adrian in, you know, against Paulie, and would reject Paulie a little bit more, but you know, it's a movie, it's a dynamic. I understand that sometimes with family it can be uncomfortable to know like where to step in and where not to. So that's just my thoughts about that. So Rocky 2 has a little bit less of the relationship dynamic in it, but I do want to touch on a few things in Rocky 2 because this was requested. Rocky and Adrian get married, and Rocky has this success. So he's made a lot of money. Rocky's not used to making a lot of money, so he doesn't really know how to handle having a lot of money, and he doesn't handle it very well. He is kind of being told that he's going to do all these commercials. He's being told he's going to do all this, so he starts to spend more money than he has. Part of the problem with Rocky is that he is naturally a very masculine man. So he's a giver. He's very willing to sacrifice his own needs to worry about other people's needs, which is a very masculine quality. He wants to give to people. He wants to give to Adrian. He wants to give to Paulie. He wants to give to, you know, everybody around him. He constantly wants to give. It's a very masculine energy to want to give. However, he's now started to get into some wounded feminine. The wounded feminine doesn't really have any self-control. The wounded feminine tends to overdo things. Now, what Rocky is overdoing tends to be over giving. So that's more his wounded feminine. He's just giving. It becomes like an addictive thing, right? He's kind of addicted to that adrenaline rush of like getting something and giving it to someone. That's where his wounded feminine starts to come in. Adrian tends to feel very unstable. You can tell, like, Adrian is focused on, like, I don't need this. Like, we don't need a car. I don't need furs. I don't need the watch. I don't need these expensive things. Like, we don't need this stuff. It's not that the feminine doesn't like things. Like, the feminine will typically love luxury, and I do think to a certain extent Adrian probably, like most women, is blocked from receiving, because most women today are blocked from their natural feminine receptive energy. However, in this particular situation, Adrian is blocked from receiving for a good reason, because Rocky's giving is unstable. He's giving from what he perceives to be this bottomless pit, but Adrian's mind, her masculine mind, is kicking in now and being like, hey, we financially can't handle this, right? So it's putting Adrian in the masculine role of having to be the mind, and Rocky is just sort of feeling into, oh, I like the jacket, I like black. You like black? I like black. It's my favorite color. Let's get the jacket. You like the fur? Let's get you the fur. You want this watch? I'll get you the watch. Let's get Paulie a watch. Let's get everybody a watch. Like, he's he's overdoing it, and he doesn't have that self-control, which is putting Adrian in a position where she needs the self-control. In a situation where you would have a woman who was, say, like your classic sort of gold digger, I don't like that term, but we'll just use that term for now. She's not gonna care. She's just gonna want to get everything she possibly can out of a man, which does tend to actually be a protective trauma response to things like, I'm gonna use a man before he uses me, that kind of thing. Different situation. A woman being blocked from receiving in her feminine is what many women are today, is not really feeling worthy to receive. I'm sure Adrian has some of that going on. Most women do, especially women that have grown up in very, you know, insecure and very sort of abusive situations like she grew up in. However, a man who just gives and gives and gives and gives and gives to a woman but doesn't actually have regard to, can he afford this, shows instability with money, and instability with money is going to signal in a woman's brain that a man is unsafe, that he's unstable, that he's not going to provide security for her. So this is why I know that our society doesn't really lend itself to this as much as it really should, but a man going out and just spending the most amount of money on a woman might temporarily appeal to a woman if she doesn't know him very well, so she doesn't really know his financial situation, or if she's really just looking to get anything she can from a man. However, a man who is spending money on a woman, as far as like taking her on dates or whatever it is, you know, whatever the situation, it doesn't necessarily have to be money, but a man who is, you know, whatever he's doing to give to a woman, if he's doing it beyond his means, it's going to feel unstable. Even if a woman is comfortable receiving, she's not necessarily going to see him as a long-term partner, because he's not going to feel like he's stable and dependable with money. It's kind of understandable why Adrian would be blocked from receiving, because she's now put in the position of, you know, they're looking at a house. She's got to think about, well, how much are the taxes? You know, what kind of piping is there? Like, what kind of, like, she's having to be the masculine mind, whereas Rocky is so much in his feminine. Like, I like this. Yeah, I like the, oh, the numbers on the house add up to 9, which I thought was interesting. I don't know if anybody else noticed this. I noticed it while I was saving clips, but he makes a reference to the numbers on the house adding up to 9, and his original apartment complex in the first movie, like, his building number was 1818, which would have been 99. I don't know if maybe Sylvester Stallone has some connection to 9, because I know he wrote and directed these movies, but I don't know, but I just thought that was, again, he's thinking in numerology, right? He's thinking, that's something that, like, you know, the masculine will think in numbers and structure, whereas like the feminine will often think in like numerology. It's like, oh, it's a 9 and 9's my lucky number. So like, that's like, she's feeling an intuition. He's much more in his feminine feeling and intuition, and she's much more in her masculine mind. So they're kind of in reverse polarity here in this point in the movie. Now Rocky ends up finding out that he's really not that literate and really can't do commercials, and he ends up in a situation where he kind of doesn't feel like he can fight anymore because he's afraid of getting injured. He doesn't really have a lot of other skills and can't really do much, so now he's put himself in this financial situation of you know, overdoing the abundance, and he doesn't actually have the security to back that up. So Adrian finds out she's pregnant. So now they have a baby on the way. They're in a pretty bad financial situation. Rocky can't keep a job. Now Adrian decides she's going to go back to work. Now Rocky's blocked from that. He doesn't want her to feel like she has to, because I mean, that's a pride thing. It's an ego thing. Adrian doesn't really want to, but she feels like she has to. And I actually really kind of appreciated this in this movie. I mean, as painful as this storyline was, Adrian ends up going into premature labor because she's doing a lot of heavy lifting and stuff like that. I don't think that we really focus as much on how dangerous it can be for women who are pregnant to have too much stress and too much strain. I mean, it's dangerous for any woman. Like, women are not designed to have this like constant like masculine pressure on them, and it tends to burn women out. But especially when a woman is pregnant and should be protecting her body and really caring for her body. Again, Adrian's doing what she has to do. And if women out there are pregnant and they have to work, they're doing what they have to do. The fact that she's now in this situation and she ends up going to premature labor, she ends up slipping into a coma, like Rocky just drops everything and is like, I'm gonna be there for her. I'm there for her, and he just does not take his attention away from her. I appreciate that. I really do. I think that was really beautiful. Throughout the movie, it was kind of like, oh, should I fight? Should I not fight? He was back and forth, like, is this my purpose? Is it not? He kind of had this fear of, I don't want to get hurt because I have a family now. I have, you know, a wife, and at that point he had a baby on the way. And sometimes when a man steps into that, where he has this commitment now with a woman and he feels this responsibility, it can feel very constraining for a masculine man. And it can also feel, if a masculine man slips into actually having a fear of death, that can very often kill his purpose, right? Because masculine men are most productive when they don't fear death. I mean, it's human to fear death, but in general, if a masculine man is living his life in fear of death, he will not likely live his true purpose. And that's kind of what's happening. But then he ends up faced in this situation with, first of all, the realization that the fact that he hasn't stepped into his full purpose caused a strain in the health of the woman he loves, potentially put his child at risk. That shook him up. The fact that he stays by her side, and when they won't let him in the room, he stays in the chapel in the hospital and won't leave her side, I thought was so beautiful. You know, put all his training, put everything on hold because he just wanted to be there for her. And the fact that he was reading to her, where he was actually like learning to read, like making himself more literate, like to her to help stimulate. Again, I mean, it's another symbol of the fact that the feminine literally is inspiring the masculine to be a better version of himself. I mean, hopefully most women don't actually have to go into premature labor and end up in a coma in order for that to happen. However, it's still another example of the fact that the feminine does inspire the masculine to be better. And, you know, she comes out of her coma, and I think she realizes now that Rocky's he's gotten more stable, he's gotten more grounded, he was there for her. He's really stepped into that full protector mode. He's stepped into his full masculine. She now feels a lot more sense of trust in him. She kind of had to completely release and surrender to, you know, life at that point. That's when she tells him that what he can do for her is win. Like, she's like, okay, I'm behind you, I've backed you. Now, she didn't really want him to fight before. That was actually an interesting scene. I wish I could have found the clip of this, but there's a really great moment where before this happened, where, you know, he said he was gonna fight, she didn't want him to fight, and he's like, I don't ask you not to be a woman, don't ask me not to be a man. He really wanted Adrian to be relaxed in her feminine energy. He really wanted that for her, but for so much of the first movie and the second movie, he didn't really know how to do that. And many times he was actively pushing her out of her feminine, but he didn't really know he was trying. Like, he really did. I mean, the thing about Rocky is that he always has good intentions, even when he screws up. He really wanted Adrian to embrace being a woman and to embrace all the aspects of being a woman. He just didn't really know for so long how to do that. However, part of doing that was for him to step into his masculine, and the only way he could do that was to fully find his true passion and purpose, which in this case, in the course of the movie, it's boxing. Whether or not you are a fan of boxing or not, or whether or not you think that's a decent purpose, or whether it's not, or whatever, that's kind of irrelevant. I mean, it's a movie, it's a film. This is an exaggerated storyline here. In Rocky's case, boxing is his passion and purpose. Rocky can't step into his true masculine and allow Adrian to step into her feminine unless he lives his passion and purpose. So Adrian was essentially trying to block Rocky from being the man that he needed to be in order for her to be the woman that she really needed to be. So that's where they were having this blockage. But now Adrian really had to fully surrender. She had no choice, right? Medical situation stepped in and made her have to do that. She wasn't conscious. In fact, she couldn't be the mind anymore. Rocky had to take over and he had to be the mind. He strengthened his mind while he was, I mean, there's a lot of symbolism here in this, while he was taking care of her. Adrian's like, hey, you know what? Be you. Be the man. Win. You know, I mean, she was terrified for him because, I mean, she knew in her heart if something happened to him where he got permanently injured, it was on her. I mean, that's a big thing for her to take on. But she also knew that she had to let him live his purpose. He goes out and, you know, has to live his purpose. There's an interesting thing. I didn't really get into too much of the Apollo Creed versus Rocky thing. You know, Apollo Creed, you don't really dive into that deeply, but you do get the impression that he's kind of living from ego. He's got a big ego going on here. The thing that I really love about sort of the end of the movie when it comes to Rocky versus Apollo Creed and sort of the end. Granted, Rocky's an Italian guy, right? So he's obviously very Catholic. And I'm not here to push any religion on anybody or anything like that. Like, your religion is your religion. However, I do really appreciate the symbolism between the fact that you have Apollo Creed, who's basically like, he's in the locker room getting ready for the big fight. It's like he's got all these people around him who are psyching him up. Like, you're the champ, you're the champ. Like, it's all about him. Rocky, you know, when he says goodbye to his wife and child because they can't go to the match, obviously, because Adrian's still not well enough and the infant's not going to go, right? Is that Rocky stops and kind of like yells to the priest outside of the priest's apartment. It's hysterical. He's just like, oh, Father Carmine, like, you want to give me a blessing? And like, he's like, oh, I got to go, I'm late, like that. I love that scene. It was just so cute. Whatever your religious beliefs, if you believe in God, divine, universe, whatever, there is something to the fact that a true masculine man who has kind of released himself from his ego is turning things over to a higher power. Whether you think that that's God and it fits into a certain religious belief, or whether you think that that's the divine, the universe, it could be the goddess, I don't care. It does not matter what it is. It's turning things over to a higher purpose. It really shows that release of ego. Seeing the comparison between, like, say, an Apollo Creed, who is literally like in his ego. He's surrounded by these yes men who are basically catering to him as the champ. And you just see Rocky, like, he's like in the men's room, in the bathroom, kind of like a dingy locker room bathroom, and he's praying. Like, he's turning things over to a higher power. That's a big step for the masculine to release his ego. And you see that too throughout this movie. In fact, the press conference between Apollo Creed and Rocky, and Apollo Creed is basically like trying to trash talk Rocky and this and that. Now I want to have this match in Philadelphia so that Rocky can be humiliated in front of his hometown. And they ask Rocky, like, how do you feel about having the match in Philadelphia? He's like, oh great, it's like 10 minutes from my house. Like, he's very chill. Like, again, he's not trying to fight from ego. He's so grounded in that state, and you see that throughout the second movie. In the first movie, he was kind of unstable, he was kind of erratic. He's really like stepping into his masculine, and with everything he's going through, you know, almost losing his wife and potentially his child and everything that he was going through, and having to turn things over to a higher power, whatever you believe that is. Rocky is so like free of ego. Like, I mean, and I think that's one of the most endearing things about him. You know, he's grounded in his masculine, but he's free from ego, which makes him such an endearing character. Probably a ton more I could talk about in this breakdown. It's already pretty long, but again, Rocky and Adrian, I just think are such great examples of people who are just flawed, but they're really good people. Like, they're genuinely good people. They just have a lot of flaws, and they're just trying to figure out their flaws, and they both love each other through their flaws. Even when those flaws actually end up hurting the other person, they still love each other through them and do their best, because they know that nothing that either of them is ever doing to each other is intentionally meant to hurt the other person. I really like seeing a movie that has two people that are horribly flawed but still love each other anyway through those flaws. And when I do these breakdowns, none of this is about emulating who these people are, what these people are doing in the film. I just want people to start noticing these things. Like, a man doesn't necessarily have to be perfect, but like, are his flaws something you can live with? A woman doesn't have to be perfect, but like, can you love her with her flaws and all? Like, are your flaws and this person's flaws, like, are they compatible with each other? And, you know, is this person actually trying to hurt me, or is this person really doing their best? Like, these are really important things to ask ourselves. So if you have seen these movies, you have any thoughts, or you want me to do a follow-up on some of the other Rocky or Rocky themed movies, let me know. If you haven't seen these movies, then after you watch this breakdown, watch the movie, see if you can pick up on some of the things that I mentioned. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. If you are a woman who'd like to connect to her feminine energy, I have online courses. Details are in the description box below, along with links to all my social media accounts. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.